The car was already packed, the engine running. When Laura Bennett felt that sharp sense that something was about to change. Not the kind of change you plan for, but the kind that sneaks up quietly and flips your life without warning. She looked at her reflection in the side mirror, adjusted her jacket, and told herself it was just another family trip. Still, her heart didn't believe it. They pulled out of their driveway in a quiet Oregon suburb just after sunrise. The sky was pale blue, the streets empty, the kind of morning that usually felt hopeful. Mark, her husband of 20 years, drove without saying much, eyes fixed on the road. He had planned this trip to a mountain lake weeks ago, calling it a fresh start. Laura wanted to believe him. In the back seat, their son Ethan sat with his headphones around his neck, but no music playing. That alone felt strange. At 17, he was usually lost in songs or scrolling through his phone. Today, he stared out the window like he was memorizing every mile they passed. Laura glanced at him through the mirror. "You sure you're okay back there?" Ethan smiled, quick and polite. "Yeah, Mom, I'm fine." The word fine landed heavy. It always did. The highway opened up, trees lining both sides, and the miles rolled by fast. Mark talked about the cabin, the lake, the hiking trails. His voice sounded hopeful, almost eager. Laura nodded, adding small comments, but her mind stayed on Ethan. Something about his stillness made her uneasy. The first hour passed quietly. Then another. The silence felt louder than any argument they'd ever had. This family used to talk nonstop on road trips. Jokes, music, snacks passed around. Today, it felt like everyone was afraid of saying the wrong thing. Laura rested her head against the window. Her reflection stared back, older than she remembered. She and Mark hadn't fought lately, but that didn't mean things were good. Love had slowly turned into schedules and habits. They cared, but the spark felt buried under years of responsibility. She wondered if Ethan felt it too. When they stopped for gas, Ethan stayed in the car. Mark filled the tank while Laura bought coffee. Through the window, she watched her son sitting alone, hands clasped, jaw tight. He looked like someone waiting for a storm. Back on the road, the trees grew taller, the air cooler. Mountains rose in the distance. The beauty should have lightened the mood, but it didn't. Ethan cleared his throat. "Mom, yes?" Laura said quickly. "Can we talk later? Like, just you and me?" Her chest tightened. "Of course. Everything okay?" He hesitated. "Yeah, just not now." Mark glanced at them. "What's up?" "Nothing," Ethan said fast. "Just tired." Laura didn't push. She knew when to wait. As they climbed higher, the road narrowed. Cell service faded. The world felt smaller, quieter. Laura sensed that whatever Ethan was holding on to couldn't stay hidden much longer. They reached the cabin in the late afternoon. It sat near the lake, surrounded by tall pine trees, simple and warm. Sunlight shimmered across the water, peaceful and still. Mark smiled wide, clearly proud of his choice. "This is perfect," he said. "Right?" "It's beautiful," Laura replied, honestly. Ethan stepped out of the car slowly, stretching his legs. He looked around, breathing deep. For a moment, Laura thought she saw relief on his face. Inside, the cabin smelled like wood and clean air. They unpacked together, moving around each other politely, like guests instead of family. Laura noticed how Ethan avoided eye contact, how he stayed close but not close enough. They cooked dinner as the sun dipped low. Mark grilled outside while Laura set the table. Ethan helped without being asked, another small sign that something was different. At the table, Mark tried to lighten the mood. He told old stories from past trips, laughing at his own jokes. Laura smiled, but Ethan only nodded, barely touching his food. "Not hungry?" Mark asked. "Just tired," Ethan replied. Laura watched him closely. Every movement felt careful, like he was afraid to spill something fragile. After dinner, they sat on the porch, watching the sky turn pink and gold. The lake reflected the colors perfectly. It should have been a moment worth capturing. No one reached for a camera. Ethan stood up suddenly. "I'm going to bed." Laura looked at him. "Already?" He nodded. Long drive. Before turning away, he stopped. His shoulders stiffened. "There's something I need to tell you both," he said quietly. "But not tonight." The words hung in the air. Laura felt her pulse race. "Okay," she said gently. "Whenever you're ready." Mark forced a smile. "You're not in trouble, kid." Ethan didn't smile back. He just nodded and walked inside. The cabin felt colder after he left. Mark let out a breath. "Teen stuff," he said. "Probably nothing." Laura wanted to believe that. But deep down, she knew this wasn't about school stress or friends. This felt bigger. That night, Laura lay awake, listening to the sounds of the cabin. The creak of wood, the wind outside, Mark's steady breathing beside her. She stared at the ceiling, replaying Ethan's voice in her head. "There's something I need to tell you." She thought about all the times she had been busy, distracted, assuming everything was fine. Parents always think they have more time. Morning came slowly. Pale light filtered through the window. Laura got up quietly and pulled on a sweater. She stepped outside, the air cold and sharp. The lake was covered in fog. Ethan sat at the end of the dock, alone. Her heart skipped. She walked toward him, footsteps soft against the wood. He didn't turn around. "Couldn't sleep?" she asked. He shook his head. "Too much thinking." She sat beside him. The water was still, the fog thick. It felt like the world was holding its breath. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Ethan said, "I didn't want this trip to start with a lie." Laura closed her eyes for a second. She knew then. Whatever he was about to say would change everything. The morning air was sharp, crisp, and smelled of pine. Laura Bennett had never been a morning person, but something about this sunrise pulled her out of bed. The cabin was quiet except for the soft rustle of leaves outside and the occasional bird call over the lake. She wrapped herself in a sweater and stepped onto the porch. Drawn toward the water as if it held answers she didn't yet understand. Ethan was already there, sitting on the edge of the dock, legs dangling over the water, shoulders tense. Staring into the fog like he was searching for something far away, Laura stopped a few feet behind him, her heart tightening. She had felt it yesterday. The weight of a secret he carried, but now, seeing him alone like this, it became undeniable. "Good morning," she said softly, careful not to startle him. He didn't turn immediately. The silence stretched, heavy with anticipation, until he finally spoke. "Mom," his voice was low, hesitant, but steady. "I need to tell you something." Laura sat beside him, letting her hand brush against his. "I'm listening," she said, keeping her voice calm. She knew that whatever he was about to say could shift the entire rhythm of their family. And she needed to be strong, patient, and supportive. "I didn't want this trip to start with a lie," Ethan said, finally meeting her eyes. They were serious, steady, filled with a mixture of fear and hope. Laura held her breath, urging him silently to continue. "I've been accepted into a music program in Toronto," he said, voice trembling just slightly. "A full scholarship." Laura's chest swelled with pride. Her son, her boy who had been quiet, withdrawn, carrying invisible weight, had achieved something incredible. "Ethan, that's amazing," she whispered. She reached for his hand, squeezing it gently. "I'm so proud of you." But she noticed immediately that he wasn't smiling. His eyes were still clouded with worry. "I didn't tell Dad yet," he confessed. "I was scared." "Scared of what, Ethan?" "That leaving will break us," he said quietly. "You and Dad. I know you've been distant. I thought if I stayed quiet, maybe things could fix themselves." Laura swallowed hard. "Sweetheart, carrying that alone? You shouldn't have had to." Her voice trembled despite her attempt to remain calm. "You don't have to be scared of telling us the truth." Just then, footsteps approached. Mark appeared on the dock, having overheard enough to understand the situation. His expression was unreadable at first, but then he softened as he looked at his son. "You should have told us sooner," Mark said, voice steady, but gentle. "But I understand why you didn't." Ethan's shoulders slumped. "I'm sorry," he muttered. Mark knelt beside him, pulling him into a firm, reassuring embrace. "I'm not upset, Ethan. I'm proud. Scared too," he admitted, "but proud. More than anything, I'm proud." Laura watched them, her eyes brimming with tears. Seeing her husband and son connect like that, she felt something inside her shift. The tension that had been quietly building in their family for years began to dissolve. This was the moment they all needed, the truth laid bare, the silence broken. For the rest of the morning, the three of them sat on the dock, talking openly for the first time in what felt like years. They talked about fear, about hope, about the weight of secrets, and about the love that had never disappeared, had only been waiting for the right time to show itself. Mark and Laura held hands, fingers intertwined, as if sealing a promise to each other. Ethan leaned against his mother, comforted by her steady presence, and occasionally glanced at his father, feeling a reassurance he hadn't allowed himself to feel in months. Lunch was quiet, but for the first time it was comfortable. No one pretended everything was fine. Instead, they shared smiles, gentle laughter, and small gestures that spoke volumes. Mark poured Laura's coffee exactly the way she liked it, and Ethan offered to grab an extra sandwich for her. These little things reminded Laura why she had fallen in love with Mark all those years ago, and why she adored her son, who had grown into a thoughtful, brave young man. The afternoon sun burned away the morning fog. They walked along the lakeside trail, the water shimmering beside them, and the conversation drifted naturally. Ethan asked about his father's college days and listened as Mark recounted stories he hadn't told in years. Laura laughed softly, letting herself be present in these simple moments. She realized the distance she had felt from Mark wasn't about the love fading, it had been about losing touch with the small, daily connections that built intimacy. And now, facing their son's truth, they could rebuild those connections, brick by brick. Later, as the day began to cool, they returned to the cabin. The fire pit outside crackled, casting a golden glow across the porch. Mark reached for Laura's hand again. She hesitated for just a moment, letting the warmth of the moment sink in before intertwining her fingers with his. "This trip," Mark said quietly, "reminded me why I fell in love with you." Laura met his gaze, heart swelling with emotions she hadn't acknowledged in years. "I needed this," she admitted softly, "more than I realized." Ethan watched from across the fire pit, a soft smile on his face. His secret, heavy as it had been, had not fractured their family. Instead, it had opened a door they hadn't known was closed, a door to honesty, closeness, and renewed love. As the sky turned shades of deep orange and purple, stars began to appear one by one, shimmering above the lake. Laura leaned against Mark, and he rested his head against hers. Ethan sat beside them, still quiet, but now at peace. The weight he had carried alone was shared, and it had not broken them, it had brought them closer. The lake reflected the stars, and the three of them sat together in silence that was no longer heavy but comforting. Laura realized that sometimes the biggest surprises in life weren't dangerous or frightening. They weren't disasters waiting to unfold. Sometimes they were opportunities, moments that revealed the depth of love, the strength of family, and the courage to face the truth. By nightfall, the cabin glowed warmly in the darkness. Laughter and conversation drifted from inside, carrying the sound of a family reconnecting. Laura tucked a blanket around Ethan's shoulders, and he leaned into her, finally relaxed. Mark adjusted the fire, and the three of them watched the flames dance, feeling, perhaps for the first time in a long time, the quiet certainty that they belonged to each other. Laura closed her eyes for a moment and whispered a silent thank you to fate, to courage, and to the son who had reminded them all that love, honesty, and connection were worth holding on to, no matter how fragile or complicated life became. The stars shone brighter over the lake, and in that moment everything felt right. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in years, the Bennetts were ready to face it together. Hearts open, secrets shared, and love stronger than ever.